Alright, let's take a look at all of the gathering glyphs that are currently available. Most of the time you'll see Glyph of Volatile Magic and Bounty being recommended, but there are 16 others, and not all of them are as useless as you might think they are. First off, if any of these look way too expensive, know that you can buy a limited use version from any of the gathering vendors for a bit of karma. And if you do want to buy some of the more expensive ones, try to convert gold to gems instead of buying them on a trading post. Quite often, this will get you the infinite gathering tool basically for free. Now, let's start with the most popular glyph, which is Volatile Magic. If you're in the market for some, these are hands down the best ones to get. They yield some of the highest return per strike on any node, as they can be exchanged for Living World Season 4 currencies and turned into trophy shipments. There is another largely undocumented glyph that would only cost you 5 gold that can beat these though, but let's finish talking about this one first. Secrets of the Obscure boosted their value even more by requiring so many tier 3 to 6 materials for any of the legendary armors or the precursor achievements. Until this changes, they'll be one of the better ones to own. I could see them dethroned eventually if a future glyph introduces a new expansion exclusive currency, but even then they'll probably be good value. A lot of people who followed the general advice to buy Unbound Magic tools for the animations might be stuck with Unbound Magic glyphs instead. While they only yield a fifth of the profit, they're still better than using none at all. Just make sure you buy the correct magic warp bundles from the vendor in Ember Bay or you'll be shooting yourself in the foot. You might have noticed I don't use any of the Unbound tools. If you want to know why, feel free to check my gathering guide in the pinned comment. While their output is different, both of these glyphs have something in common. They reward you for each strike. You'll notice that websites such as Fast Farming and Pew Research Center list different values when it comes to harvesting and mining or logging. That's because plant nodes reward higher amounts than trees and ores, which is even further exacerbated by buffs such as the item booster. Last year, I bored a lot of you by talking about the candy corn gobbler over and over again. If you don't know why that was, go and check out the video in the pinned comment as well, as it's literally the single best item to own in the game, and ArenaNet made it much more user-friendly with the latest patch. 7 of the other glyphs kind of do the same. They reward you with extra materials. Glyph of the Watch Knight was actually the best to use for mining and logging before and during parts of End of Dragons, but eventually got dethroned by Volatile Magic. This is also a great example of how a balance patch can upend the value of materials or glyphs. And if you own any of these, don't despair. They're actually still great to use, but more so in lower level zones. That's because they drop level appropriate materials for the zone you're currently in. And if you prefer farming a single map instead of teleporting all around, then focusing on iron and platinum is much better than mithril anyway. One glyph that gives you something extra that is only mentioned on Pew Research Center is Bounty. This one gives you a chance to land an extra strike on a node, which in itself can proc additional strikes. That means that plant nodes can now give you up to 4 strikes, but there is a caveat for trees and ores, as the additional gathers can only occur from the first strike. You can find all of the numbers behind this on the wiki, but in general you can roughly expect a 47.5% increase in resources for plants and just under 16% for ores and wood. Knowing what nodes to use this glyph on is essential, but luckily Pew has given us a comprehensive list to work with. If you don't want to bother swapping out glyphs all the time, just do what I do. Volatile Magic in your pick and axe and Bounty in your sickle. There are a few more unique glyphs, and one of them used to sell for about 6 gold a couple of years ago, but people kinda caught on to its value, as the Glyph of Alchemy will now set you back a cool 120 gold. While this one doesn't award you extra resources, it upgrades whatever you're gathering instead. This is inconsequential for most nodes, but it does have a few uses. Every day, you can gather up to 150 mithril ore and elderwood logs, which will then be converted into orichalcum ore and ancient wood logs. I usually do this in ore as the zone is rife with those, and makes it so that I never have to buy either of these materials. This glyph can also turn rich gold veins into a proverbial gold mine, as it quadruples the value of the ore and isn't limited to 150 strikes. It's also worth considering for a few other ores and trees, and might actually beat out any of the glyphs we've already discussed. Its counterpart, the Glyph of the Crucible, is only covered on the wiki, and is the one I'm kind of hesitant about explaining. That's because right now the glyph sells for 5 to 7 gold. And if you use it right, it can actually beat out the Glyph of Volatility. Disclaimer, I bound 3 to my account years ago, but I did not stock up on any to sell, nor am I planning to. Sometimes my videos can spike up the prices of items, but that's no reason for me to avoid pointing things out. if you mainly play in zones with Mithril ore and Elderwood, then this glyph is actually a cheap alternative for volatility. The profit from downgrading Mithril into Platinum is higher than the current value of Volatile Magic and is on par for turning Elderwood into Hardwood. As I mentioned, you can find a ludicrous amount of these in ore, which respawn every hour, and maps like Ember Bay and Siren's Landing have massive clusters of Elderwood trees that respawn every hour as well. And this glyph has even more uses, but those involve some extra effort on our end. Certain plants can be downgraded into much more expensive ones, and since the item booster functions like a Glyph of Bounty, you could get a couple of silver per strike, but you need to make sure to use it on the right nodes only. Lastly, this glyph can also downgrade map exclusive materials into Mithril or Elderwood. Generally, I wouldn't recommend this, as materials such as Imperial Fragments, Bloodstone Dust and so on are better spent on something else. Just know that it's a possibility. There are some glyphs that don't reward you with anything extra, but they rather change the way you gather. I'm not the biggest fan of glyphs such as Flight, Overload or the Timekeeper, as I rather get something extra every strike. One that might be worth considering for anyone who doesn't like gathering but still needs materials is the Glyph of Reaping, as it'll let you gather everything around you with a single strike. And one of the ones that I find hard to put a value to is the Glyph of Industry, which completes gathering 50% faster and is actually about the same as using Quickness. The one use case I could see for this is if you play a character without access to Quickness and you mainly farm zones for Platinum and Iron. That way you can try and squeeze out an extra round every hour or so. There are two more glyphs that I didn't cover yet. Virtue doesn't have a free equivalent as it awards you karma every strike. This is decent, but there's far better ones out there. And there is actually no permanent glyph that mirrors the Frostbitten tools, which you can buy during Winter's Day. You could stock up on some of those, gather with them, and sell the snowflakes throughout the year, as people use them for the festival booster. That's it for now. Extra guides in a pinned comment and resources are in the description. Oh, and starting from today, you can become an only fan of my channel.